In this video, I'm going to show you step by step how to take your ScreenFlow recordings and edit those in ScreenFlow 9. This is perfect for you if you're brand new to creating and editing any kind of video. We're going to start with the very basics. Now, in my very last video, I showed you exactly how to set up your screen recordings in ScreenFlow 9 to record your screen. But ScreenFlow is so good when it comes to editing your screen recordings because you can edit out any mistakes that you make, but you can also add in special effects, graphics, sound effects, animations. I like to say that ScreenFlow is like my secret weapon when it comes to screen recordings, and it's all because of the editing functions. So we're going to dive into this from where we left off in my previous video. So in our editing window, we have the canvas, which is the main part of the window here. That's where we kind of see all of the action happening. We also have the canvas control, the playback controls where you can press play or advance forward or go backwards. And then we have the timeline area. And this is where we actually make things happen. Now you can expand this or shrink it just like I did by kind of grabbing the right spot there. You can also do the same over here with the properties window over here on the right hand side. So this canvas control down here is going to let you change the size of your canvas if you need to do that, but you should have already selected the desired size when you recorded your screencast. So I'm just going to hit this little green check mark there. And down here in our timeline, I'm just going to bring this up so you can see it a little bit. We have 3 tracks here that we've put together based on the recordings that we did previously in that tutorial video. So this track here, and you can see it selected right here. This track is my webcam track. It's also, there's audio there. You can see those green waveforms there. This track down here, this is the iPhone recording. If you remember, I showed you that you can record your iPhone screen and your iPad screen within ScreenFlow and then edit it within ScreenFlow. So this is the iPhone recording track right here. And then down here is the track, which I have a couple different clips on here of the actual screen, like my actual desktop screen. So if I made this go away by just hiding it there by hitting the little eyeball, then you can see just that desktop screen that was recorded. So this is like 2 different video clips here. You can take and move these. You could even move this up to a different timeline if you wanted to, but we want to keep our layers kind of intact here. So these act just like a video clip that you would normally find in any video editing software. But if you have never edited before, then what you need to know is that this is a clip, this is a clip, this is a clip, and this is a clip. And these are all essentially individual files that were recorded when you recorded your screencast. To see those files within ScreenFlow, if you come over to the properties window and come all the way over here to your project library, you can see that you have this file and this file. That's what these are here. So we have all these files over here in our project library, but they are also down here on the timeline. And these tracks act just like layers. So I'm going to zoom in and zoom out on the timeline just by hitting the minus button and the plus button on the keyboard. If you do command minus and command plus, that's going to zoom in or zoom out on your canvas. These tracks act as layers. If you think of a layer of a cake, for example, the one that is on top is going to be the one that is visible on top. So if you move it over top of another layer, you're going to cover up the layer that is below it. If you switch these around by just clicking and dragging, pulling that up, you'll see they switch spots. Now the iPhone recording is covering up that webcam recording. So these are layers here. So you move them around just by clicking and dragging them. If I put this screen, the actual screen recording on top, obviously that's going to cover up everything because that's the entire size of the canvas. Now, while we're still talking about our file library over here, this is just the screen recordings that we've recorded with ScreenFlow. If you wanted to bring another file in, like for example, a logo or something, all you really have to do is find your logo on your computer, drag it into your library here, and you can place this onto any of these. You can see it created a new track for us. Of course, we want this to be on the top layer so that we can see it. And then I'll show you how to move it around, change the size, and maybe add some animations to it as well. But that's how you will bring in different files like a logo or an image, even a video file. And if while you're editing, you realize maybe you forgot to add something to your screen recording and you need to record some additional screen recordings, all you have to do is come up here to the plus button and hit add recording. It's going to bring up your recording window, and it's really as simple as that. So right up here at the top of this properties window over here, there are a lot of different icons here that open up different property windows, and they all do different things. They have different functions, and that's really what we're going to be focusing on here. But before we get to that, I want to show you the basics of actually cutting up and moving some of your clips around on your timeline. So we have your timeline. You already know what that is. I want to make some of these disappear so it's a little bit easier, and we're only working with just this one clip right here. It's just a boring clip of my clean desktop. So if I just right click on this, the basics of what you need to know when you're just starting out with your screencast editing is splitting your clip. And what splitting your clip means is if we select it, it's going to break this up into two completely different clips here. You can see I can move this around. Hitting the T button is going to do the same thing. So that's the keyboard shortcut for splitting your clip. Now I have a cheat sheet for all of the major commands, keyboard commands that I use inside of ScreenFlow. I'll put a link to that down in the description. You can just put in your email, grab it for free, and then you'll have all of my keyboard shortcuts. But if you have a long clip and you're going to go through the entire clip and get rid of small or even large pieces and parts where you messed up your words or you had to re-record or just anything you wanted to get rid of, a quick way to do that is to, let's move over here. If we wanted to get rid of this weird transition, I'm going to put my scrubber bar right here before the transition starts. I'm going to hit the I button on my keyboard. You see that it now creates this weird blue thing over here. And then I'm going to put my scrubber bar after the transition, and I'm going to hit the O button. So what we did is we set an in point for the I and an out point for the O. And now we have this section here. And if I hit Command delete on my keyboard, it deleted just that section that was selected. Now the in and out points apply to the entire timeline. So if you use this function, it's going to apply to even the tracks below or above the clip that you're working with. So if you need to, you could zoom out a little bit. You could bring your clip to a part of your track that's not going to be affected by all of this. Bring it like way down here, zoom in. We're going to go in, and then here we're going to go out. Command delete. It's going to delete what you had selected and then bring everything else together. And these are going to be broken up into their separate clips. So in and out, Command delete. And that is a quick way that you can go through one file and get rid of a bunch of different parts, whatever you want to select, and just Command delete and delete that thing. And again, you can move these clips around and place them in different orders, however you need to do it. Whatever you need to do there, you can also click and drag the end or beginning of a clip to just adjust the beginning or end of a clip. So the video properties pane over here is where you'll be able to make changes to any of the recorded or imported video clips, or even any of the images if you import still images as well. So let's check this out. I'm going to zoom in here on my whole timeline. What I want to do is we're going to select tell you what, we're going to hide the logo. I'm going to make this a little bit bigger. So we're looking just at this webcam file here. And you can see there's stuff. If I scrub through here with this red scrubber bar, they call this a scrubber bar. So you can just grab it and move it around, and you can scrub through your video file. So you can see things moving around back there. So I want to make sure that I have this selected, so I can just click it on the timeline, or I could click it right up here in the actual frame. So anything that we do over in our video properties settings is going to affect just this clip that we have selected. So we can scale it up or down. So make it bigger, make it smaller. You can also just grab those corners to make it bigger or smaller as well. There are some shortcuts here where you can stretch it out to make it the full, fill the entire frame, or you can revert it completely back to the size that it was to begin with. You can also just grab this clip and move it around. And then of course you have the ability to rotate. This is an X rotation. So if you just wanted to kind of tilt a little bit, you would want to do a Z rotation. So you can change the opacity if you want to. In this case, for this application with a webcam and a screen recording in the background, I wouldn't recommend doing anything like that. Now, under cropping, you're going to see left, right, top, and bottom. So you could make this square if you wanted to. Just square it up a little bit. There you go. And then you can adjust it just like before, but now it is square. Coming on down to the reflection, you can see that it creates this kind of reflection effect, which is pretty cool, but it might be distracting depending on what your screencast is going to be looking like. And you can change the amount of reflection. Looks like it's changing the opacity of that reflection. We have a corner radius. You can round your corners a little bit just for that added effect. Then below that, we have our drop shadow. Let's put this back in so you can see the drop shadow over here on the right hand side. If you drop the drop shadow panel down, you can get some actual settings here. So you can change the direction of the drop shadow. We have the color controls. Be careful with the color controls when especially you're editing something like your face with your webcam, because it can look very, it can look not so professional if you go crazy with it here. And then down here under video filters, we don't have any video filters. If I hit this little plus button over here, we can create a video filter. So let's come down and create a Gaussian blur. We'll hit add. And we just created a filter where if you adjust the radius, that's adjusting the amount of blur that you have going on there. And you can check it and uncheck it to turn it on or off. So those are all the basic adjustments and properties that you can make to each of your video files and any image files that you bring in to ScreenFlow. You can do this for all of your files. So you can change the dimensions of any of these using either the dots, or you can scale it up, scale it down, rotate it, do anything you want there to any of your files that are in your timeline. Now, before we move on from the video properties screen, we have to talk about this action button up here, because this is really cool. This allows you to create a movement or a transition to change the state of the video file or the image that you're working with. So in this case, we're going to do this with our logo. So we have the logo right here in the middle. If I want it to on the screen, if I want to make the animation like move from the middle to the bottom left, maybe even get smaller, change the size or something, what we're going to do is we're going to put our scrubber bar wherever we want this to happen. And then I'm going to hit that action button. And then I'm going to change where I want this to actually go and what I want it to do. So I'm going to put it down there. So if I come back here and I hit play, everything, right? So on its own, it animated, it moved, and it got smaller. So we can make the duration of that animation however short or long that we want it. That's kind of silly right there. We can come down here and make it fast. Everything. Boom, right? Like that. So moving on to the audio panel, I have the audio panel selected over here. That's the little speaker. And you can see there's nothing here that I can do. And that's because I have the logo selected. And there's no audio attached to that. So we have no audio to edit. So you have to have something selected that actually has audio in order to edit the audio. And just like with the video properties, you're only editing the file that is selected. So if you have more than one file that you need to edit the audio, you're going to have to do that on every single one. It's hard to see because it's like green on green with a yellow outline. I didn't design ScreenFlow, but you can see we have these little like mountains, right? These are our waveforms. Where the mountains are higher is where I am speaking, and where they're lower is where I'm either not speaking or I'm taking a breath or a pause or something. So you can see all these peaks and valleys over here. Those are the waveforms. What we want to do is, usually I don't have to edit my audio at all. So usually if I'm talking into my microphone like I am right now, I can get away with not doing any editing, but sometimes maybe I don't want to have any audio at all. So if that's the case, if you have audio that you want to mute completely throughout the whole video, you can just hit this mute audio button. If you have some background music, which we'll talk about a little bit later, and you need to adjust the volume of the background music with the volume of your speaking, then you may want to bring up your volume of your microphone a little bit, bring down the volume of your background music. Moving on down to ducking, this is something you might want to play with. I don't usually use it, but if you have background music or any audio things going on in the background, ducking is going to attempt to automatically bring the volume of your speaking voice down so that your background music can be heard, or vice versa. You can play with this. I never usually use ducking because it does it automatically and it doesn't usually do that good of a job. And so I just don't use it. One thing that I do like to use is this button for smooth volume levels. And that's going to analyze the audio of the whole track that is selected. And it's going to attempt to smooth things out a bit so that there's some consistency with the audio there. Now, if you expand the audio mix panel here, this is something I don't ever mess with, but you can edit the different channels of the different audio. And then we have this effects option here. So what we can do is we can check that box. We have some pre-selected effects like large hall, a large room, cathedral, large chamber. So if you want to get a specific effect, you could play around with this. We do have a filter here to remove background noise, and this is something you might want to do if you have an air conditioning system or heating, or if you record in a busy place where you have background noise. So moving to the motion tab over here, the motion tab enables you to control the motion of your media. It's similar to the actions that you can add to your video, but it's just a little bit different. And this is another thing that you'll have to play with a little bit. So if you hit that action button, come down to effect, make sure that's selected, and you'll have a drop down here where you can choose something. So if we choose pulse, for example, let's see what that looks like. On the screen, it's going to record the mouse movements, the clicks, and the audio and everything. Now I've moved over to the screen recording project that I'm currently working on in order to show you the next pane. So the screen recording properties pane over here, there's a lot that you can do to enhance the experience of the person who's going to be watching your video, specifically when it comes to the mouse pointer. So you can see down here near the timeline in the canvas, my mouse pointer is there and it's super, super small, super tiny. I can make it go away completely if I wanted to, and then that mouse pointer is not going to show up in my screen recording at all. But for the tutorials that I create, it's really helpful to be able to see where I'm clicking. So I always have the mouse pointer there. So you could make it 500%, but you can work with it and see what might work with you. So I'm going to make it just a little bit bigger here. And then you can also add a click effect. So you can either do a radar effect right up here. You can see I have the mouse click here. Let's see what happens with the radar effect. So you can change the size of the radar effect. You can change the color that it is giving off. So by default, it's going to be on red. And then you can also change the duration. So you would want to do this in situations where you know that your viewers or the users of your video need some extra assistance following along what you're doing on the screen. Another option that I really like in here is sound on click. I don't always apply this. There's a lot of clicking sounds happening if I do apply it. And lastly, here in this pane is something really cool, and that is the keystroke. So you can show the keystrokes on your screen. So anything that you're typing into your keyboard, like keyboard commands while you're recording, those are going to be recorded with ScreenFlow, and then you can edit how they show up. So in this example here, I'm hitting Command Delete on my keyboard to move some of these items into my trash can. As you can see, I have a lot of stuff on my desktop here. And over here in ScreenFlow, you can see I hit the I button on the keyboard and then the O button to create this section that we want to get rid of, and then Command Delete on my keyboard to get rid of that section. Now moving on over to the Callout Properties, this is another place where you're probably going to spend quite a bit of time enhancing your screen recordings, but it's a little bit confusing about how to actually make these things happen. So I'm showing you a few examples on the screen of callouts. In order to create a callout, you have to make sure you have your screen recording file selected on your timeline. Hit the action button over here, and by default, the highlight option is going to be set to mouse cursor. That means if I scrub through here, you'll be able to see that wherever this yellow callout is on our file means that it's going to follow the mouse cursor wherever the mouse cursor happens to go. So it's almost like a little bit of a spotlight, if you will. You can adjust the opacity of everything else on the screen. So you could have it completely black and then only follow the mouse. If you bring it down a little, by default, this is about where it's going to be, somewhere in there. You could actually blur out where your mouse is pointing to if you wanted to do it that way, or you could select blur background and it's going to take this darker area here and blur the background. And then you'd want to bring the opacity, the blur down where the mouse is, and then everything else is kind of blurred out. There's a better way to blur things out though. Let me show you in just a minute. You have the option to increase the size of that circle. You can also, if you select border, this is a little bit confusing. It doesn't actually give it a border. It's just the size, like how big your circle is actually going to be. So if you want to really point something out on the screen, you can size it up really far, and it's automatically going to follow wherever your mouse is going on the screen for whatever duration you select down here on the timeline. You can add an outline. We've got a blue outline there. We could make it green. You could add a shadow. It's hard to see the shadow on this because the background is so dark. And down here under build, this is going to essentially create a little bit of a transition into this feature. So I'm going to adjust this a little bit and let's see what happens when we hit play. So right here at the beginning, it sort of builds up. You can see it goes, if I use my keyboard, you can see it goes up into its circle, and it transitions into this zoomed in and magnified version here of the call out. So that's a mouse cursor call out. If we want to do something a little different and say add a foreground window call out, what this is going to do is take whatever foreground window you automatically have on your screen. In this case, we're showing settings within Final Cut Pro, and because that settings window is open, ScreenFlow automatically knows that's the foreground window. So we're going to highlight the foreground window, and we're going to make everything else kind of darkened and blurred out. So you can change the opacity. You could blur the window that's up if you wanted to, or again, blur the background. You could zoom the window up. You could make the border of that window a little bit bigger. Same sort of situation as before, except it's not a circle and it's not following the mouse. It's just highlighting the windows that are coming into the foreground. And then again, the third one is the freehand. And this one is actually my favorite because it's the most flexible. So what I like to do is select freehand, and you can see that you can select a circle or a square over here. I'm going to select the square. And let's just say I want to highlight this menu option. Right over here, there's that menu drop down, and it's going to, again, make this background dark. We could make the background a little bit blurry, and then we can zoom this up a little bit. And so instead of following the mouse around, it's just going to take the square that I created and make it bigger, no matter what's inside of that square, right? So even if I move off of the menu item, the square is going to stay put just like it is. Now, a moment ago, we talked about blurring something on your screen, and I told you there's an easier way. There's a way that I like to do it, especially in situations where I have like my phone number or a password or login information or something on the screen on just one part of the screen that I want to blur out so that you guys can't see it. So how I like to do that is come up to the action button again, go to freehand. So let's say I didn't want you to be able to see all of my icons down here at the bottom of my screen. I don't know why I would need to hide those, but hey, you never know, right? And so we have that selected, and now we can hit blur, and it's going to blur out just those things, and we can make the opacity up here completely down to 0. So there's nothing obstructing the rest of the screen. It's just blurring out that one little part that I didn't want you to see. And again, with this call out, we can move this anywhere we want on the timeline. And this is where that build feature kind of comes in handy, because instead of just having a random blurry thing just pop up there, it'll sort of ease in. So let's see what that looks like. Aha, there you go. Now all of my icons are hidden. You can also select more than one spot on your screen. You know, if you have your phone number and a password and, you know, something else you don't want people to see, all you have to do is make those selections and then bring up the blur, and you can see right here, here, and here, I have them all blurred out on these different parts of the screen. Now, if you change your mind and you want to remove that action, just make sure that you have the action itself selected and hit delete, and that action is going to go away. Moving over, we have a touch call out panel, which is going to be useful for your iPhone screen recordings or your iPad screen recordings. And it works in a similar way, but it's not quite as handy. But what you can do is hit action, and you can see it gives us this gray dot on the screen, which is supposed to essentially signify where you would be clicking on something within your screen. But it doesn't follow it automatically like it would with your cursor on a regular like desktop screen recording. So if I want to show me opening up my email app, I'm going to move that touch call out right there, and we can change the color. We can make it, I don't know, a little bit brighter. We can give it an outline, and we can change the size, make it a little bit bigger. And so that's just going to show up on our screen for the duration that we want it to show up, and where we actually place it on the screen. Now, maybe in the future, I'll do a separate video on some of the tips and tricks for editing your iPhone and iPad screen recordings. But for now, let's keep moving on over here. We want to look at the annotations option. Now, annotations are ways of putting shapes and circles, squiggles, squares, lines, whatever you need on your screen. So make sure you have your screen recording selected. Hit the plus button. It's going to create an annotation sort of as its own file, as its own kind of thing that you can manipulate here on your timeline. And we have the option to select a line, a filled in square, an empty circle, or I guess that's a squiggly line. I'm not sure. So we can change the color. I always like to change the colors of things instead of just going by the default. We'll go with the pink this time. And since we have a line selected, we're going to make a pink line. If we wanted to also add a rectangle or this kind of rectangle or a circle, whatever you need to do there. And then you can change the thickness of that item that you have selected. You also have the opacity there. So the thickness is only going to matter on the ones where you have an actual outline. So there we go. So there's a line. We can change the thickness. We can change the opacity. We can give things a shadow. We can then adjust that shadow. Or we can give things their own outline with a different color. When you have the line option selected, you can select different endpoints for your line. So you can easily create an arrow just like this. So for an arrow, you want to add a line and then change your endpoint, and then you can make it longer. You can change the rotation of it so that it's pointing to the right place. Now, because the annotations are added to your timeline as its own element that you can move around, change, manipulate, you can adjust how long or short it is. You could also select it and go to the video motion tab, select action, and create an actual motion so that you have your arrow. And let's say you want to draw attention to whatever the arrow is pointing to, you can make it pulse any way that you want to. Just like that. Now moving on over to this big T over here. T stands for text. Not a big surprise there. If you hit this plus button, it's going to add text to your project as its own element, just like it did with the annotations. So this is going to be over top of all of the other layers. You can move it around and put it anywhere you want, make it as long or short as you want. I'm going to move it over here so you can see it a little bit better. And to put in the text you want, you can just double click it right here within your canvas. And we'll say this is a text box. And with that done, we can come over and select whatever font we want here. Let's choose Oswald. I love Oswald. Isn't that great? It's like so fun. And then you can select the alignment. You can also select the color of the text. So that's going to look pretty bad with our background. So we'll go with something kind of like this. Now, as you can see, it's off the actual frame, right? So we're going to move it right here into the middle. We also have this ugly black background. We don't want that. So we're going to deselect this backdrop option. So we just have that blue text showing up. If you wanted it there, you could change the color and make it a different color, change the opacity, whatever you wanted to do there to make that work for you. And you have the option to outline your text, which can be very helpful just for readability purposes of the person watching your screen recording video. So don't forget about that. Usually I like to do like a white. If I need an outline, it's usually going to be a white outline, but it depends on what I'm doing. And then down here at the bottom, we have a build in animation and a build out animation. And what this is going to do is essentially give us some transition of when the text comes on the screen and then when the text leaves the screen. So our text is going to be on the screen for just a little bit of time. Let's see what it looks like. Let me move our arrow. See what this looks like coming in. So it's kind of zooming in from the left and then it's zooming back out on the left. So those are the build in and build out animations. Build in is when it's coming in. Build out is when it's leaving the actual frame. So down here under type, you can select exactly what you want it to do. So we could do typewriter effect. What does that look like? Yeah, that one's nice. I like the typewriter. It's nice and simple. And if we wanted to, I don't know, break apart on the move out, let's see. So typewriter comes in and then it breaks apart on its way out. And then with that, these options have different settings here for the duration. You have an overlap setting. You would have to play with these to see what's going to work best for you. So that's how you create your different text. Now, if you have multiple text boxes that you need to have and they all need to come in at different times and they need to do different things, you'll have to create a text box for each of those. So you can either hit the plus button and start from scratch, or you can select your text box that you have it styled the way you want it, hit copy, bring your cursor, your scrubber bar over and hit paste, and it's going to create another text box for you that you can edit the text box there. And then from there, you can change the color of this one. You want to make sure your text is selected. So you can have a blue one and a pink one. If you want these both to be on the screen at the same time, you're going to need another layer in your timeline, another track. Then you could put these right on top of each other. You could actually move one here and move this one down here. So you can have multiple text boxes on your screen at different times. They could, some could last longer or come in sooner. And then they all have their own animations, their own build in, build out, their own colors, and all that kind of stuff. You can manipulate them separately and have those multiple text boxes on the screen. And then the last item over here in the properties pane is this media library, which we've already talked about at the way beginning. This is where all of your different screen recordings or files that you import, images that you import, this is where you're going to find all of them. So if you decide you want to delete something from your screen, if we delete this whole thing, we can just add it back in. You can drag it right back down to your timeline and put it on whichever layer that you want to put it on. Now, there's a couple other things you may want to know about when it comes to enhancing your screen recording that you won't find in the properties pane. And that is the individual properties of clips. And if you hit the little gear icon, this is where you can pull up several different options here. So if you open up the show clip inspector, this is going to tell you the exact duration of the clip. And this is where you could adjust the speed. You can make it go faster by increasing the percentage, or you can make it go slower. So if you need to do fast forward or if you need to slow things down, you're going to adjust your speed there. I'm going to put this back at 100. You can also select the option to play a clip in reverse. And if you want to lock what you have here so that you don't accidentally click this, delete it, add any animations or anything to it, then you can hit that lock button too. So again, that's under the gear icon and then the clip inspector. There's a few more things under this gear icon that you might want to know about as well. We have the ability to add transitions either to the beginning of the clip or the end or both. And the way that we would do that is let's just hit add starting and ending transitions. And if we zoom in here, you can sort of see it's a little bit hard, but we can change the duration of the transition. So if you want something to kind of transition, swoop in quickly, then you would want to make this a shorter, there we go, a shorter one. If you want it to ease in, then you would make it a little bit of a longer transition. Now, what it's going to do by default is sort of fade in. If I just, without selecting any kind of transition at all, if I simply move these in together, then we're going to have one fade in while the other one is fading out equally, like that. So it's really up to you how you want to do this. I generally like to keep my transitions pretty simple and pretty quick if I use any transitions at all. So now that you know the ins and outs of editing your videos with ScreenFlow 9, hopefully this becomes your secret weapon as well. Now, I let you know that I have a ScreenFlow 9 cheat sheet. It's totally free. It's a one-page download. I put all of the keyboard shortcuts that I usually use inside of ScreenFlow that I mentioned in this video right there, so you can save it to your device or print it out. I put a link to that right down below this video. And if you're looking for more video editing and creating tutorials, I queued up this playlist over here for you, and I'll see you there.